You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. This is a podcast where I, Evan Burke, a writer of some note, if you talk to the right people, who are my parents, I ask myself, why
lovely people
is wrestling? Why would you do this? And most people are kind of on board with me about that. They're like, why is this? Why? This seems dumb. This seems like it's bad for society. I don't like the people who like it. I don't want them to live near me. I think that their facial hair is dumb. I think that pretending you're a doctor of rock music is a bizarre endeavor to do.
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I think claiming to have a doctorate in philosophy from the City University of New York and teaching there under an assumed identity is a terrible thing to do. But that's neither here nor there.
That would be a terrible thing to do, yes.
That would be a horrible thing to do, to kill a man and pretend to be a philosophy professor named Ben Abelson, who was the man that you killed.
But hey, you gotta find some way to get a platform to talk about pro wrestling that people who aren't wrestling fans might listen to.
So
it's harder than you'd think.
In case you have never listened to us before, I don't really care for wrestling. I grew up thinking it was just dumb. Never really put a lot of thought into it. But my two co-hosts are two of my oldest and closest friends, and I love and respect them very much. And they are about as into wrestling as human beings can be into something. And so this is me trying to figure out how that works. And they're gonna introduce themselves, and then I'm gonna talk about what our topic is for today.
My name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been involved in professional wrestling for about a dozen years. I do commentary and ring announcing primarily these days. I wrestle. Yeah, if you want me to wrestle, I will totally put on my tights and wrestle. And I like talking about wrestling. I've been watching wrestling since 1992. I have a lot of opinions and a lot of experience. And Dr. Abelson, who are you?
Well, I am ostensibly Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College.
It's generally accepted that you are Benjamin Abelson.
That's the theory. The prevailing theory, as it were. And perhaps there is some evidence for it. Hello.
Now, all right. Now I'm going to explain. I feel like I need to explain something. So my thought process for today's episode. I usually pick the topics. I usually am like, hey, I've heard about this wrestler. I've heard about this person. What's the deal with this concept? And let's do an episode around that. And that's what happened today. And my thought process initially was, I've heard of Roddy Piper. I know that he's famous. I vaguely know that he's Scottish. My family is mostly Scottish. I think his family is actually from the same place that my grandparents are from, Glasgow, which is also
his real last name is Toombs, if that helps. Toombs, I believe.
So, and my thought was, I was like, oh, cool, we can do. I know he's like, I want to do some classic stuff. I know he's supposed to be very entertaining. And then also we wanted to do some premium episodes where we start watching movies starring wrestlers. And there's some great classic movies, some great classic B movies that I've actually never seen because, as I have revealed before on this podcast, I've only seen like 8 movies.
A Filmistine, as it were.
Yes, yeah. I don't like hate or not believe in film. I just don't make the time for it. Is what it is. I just watch more
movies.
TV.
Exist.
Yeah. I'm not anti-movies. That's not. I am. I'm more of, TV works more for my taste.
There was a period of time when we were all hanging out, Doc, if you'll remember, where like we were kind of anti-movie. We were like, Hollywood is bullshit. Like, if we're going to watch movies, they're going to be cheesy fucking sci-fi B movies. Wrestling is the thing to watch.
And we did.
Yes.
A lot. Like, a lot.
There was not a lot of... I feel like there weren't a lot of great movies in the early 2000s.
I remember feeling just growing up that, I mean, at least when it comes to, like, conventional Hollywood movies, you know, in wrestling, sometimes the bad guy wins. You know,
Yeah.
Hollywood films, like, you kind of know
Yeah.
how it's going to work out one way or another.
True,
Yeah.
that's true. It teaches some important life lessons, which is tangentially sort of what I'm getting to. So my intention was just like, oh, cool, like, so we can do Roddy Piper and it'll be a fun thing. My intention was not, and I'm now having watched Roddy Piper and seen him in action and seen some of his promos and classic stuff. I just want to clarify, my intention was not, oh, let us, during this time of reckoning with America's history of racism, let's cover one of the more outwardly racist wrestlers. That was not the thought process here. I did not realize that, like, holy shit, the shit that you could just fucking say on television in the 80s. Really blows my mind. Now, I also was very entertained by Roddy Piper, and like, look, my goal when we talk about the shitty things from wrestling's past, like, I'm not trying to cancel Roddy Piper. I'm not out here like hashtag cancel Roddy Piper.
It'd be
just,
hard to
like,
cancel
shit on
him
it.
now that he's dead. But
Yes, yeah. The God canceled him already, so that would be wrong for me to try to do it. And the point is like, but it's like, I don't know. Yeah, I also feel like I have to talk about it. It's a big part of why I was so anti-wrestling for so long, is because this was kind of a big part of my perception, even if I didn't know about Piper specifically. Definitely my perception of wrestling was that it was incredibly disrespectful to everybody who wasn't a white dude. Even if I couldn't necessarily articulate that in the late 90s when I was a teenager and nobody really talked about this stuff, I still had this feeling that, like, wrestling was a thing that seemed to not like women and seemed to, like, be shitty towards black people and seemed to be a thing that racists liked. No, I'm not saying. I now understand that that's more complicated, but yeah. So I don't know. It's a thing that we have to talk about. When we talk about wrestling's past, I think.
yeah, I mean, I think there's also something to be said for the fact that Piper got over in the WWF as a heel, being sexist and racist and all that stuff.
Sure.
And some of that you can chalk up to as being a heel, right? We should boo those sentiments and attitudes.
Sure.
Of course, he didn't stop when he turned face. And that's the really sort of more worrisome thing, is that the crowd just kind of kept going along with it, especially the homophobic stuff that we're going to talk about involving Adrian Adonis. But also, even getting into the 90s, Piper was pulling stunts that are very objectionable.
Yeah, he had said, especially in the era that we're kind of watching now in the mid 80s, he wanted to get heat, and the best way to get heat was to do that against the people, he was getting against. These days, the attitude would be, how come a company wants to put that on their television? At the time, the attitude was, this guy's despicable, let's go to the show and watch somebody beat him up. And that's the real difference between the entertainment industry then and the entertainment industry now. People cared a lot less about, like, what a company was choosing to present at the time. They took it a little bit more at face value, I think.
I do also think that there is that a lot of people would say that, I don't want to, like, speak for anybody, but I have seen a lot of, like, people of color who are fans of anything in geekdom or anything in media, talking about how you can be a big fan of something and then, like, that still, no matter how it's contextualized or no matter how it's framed in the story or anything, it still sucks when Roddy Piper implies that Mr. T has painted himself black, which is both racist and baffling. And once again, like, I'm not saying, like, oh, therefore hashtag cancel Roddy Piper, like, oh, fuck Roddy Piper. But I think that I think that there is a big difference, is that it's not just like, oh, like, people are more walking on eggshells or more afraid to beat. It's like, no, we understand the depths of how fucked up that is in a way that
Just
we did
things
not
have progressed
understand
a
at the
bit.
time.
Just wait
Yeah.
till we get to Roddy Piper painting himself black.
Yeah.
Oh my, what have I signed on for? And, like, look, I also objectively have to admit, I enjoyed these matches dramatically more than I have enjoyed wrestling from this era that we have watched. Like, I enjoyed Piper's, but I don't know if I would necessarily watch him do a whole match. Actually, the match with Mr. T kind of sucked. But
the match with Brett is one of my favorite matches of all time.
I
It's in like my top
fucking
10.
loved it. Dude,
Oh yeah,
it
the
actually
story they told was incredible.
was going to warm your heart a little bit. I feel like, I'm like, okay.
Right.
I'm starting to see what's up with Brett here.
Good.
This is interesting.
Yeah, because if any match would do it, it would be this one. Like,
Yeah.
you know, now we've been doing this show for a while, and, you know, I had my list in my head of my favorite matches, but now I've had to sort of reconsider them. And this is, you know, I think like this, the Sasha Banks Ronda Rousey match we did recently, and like Daniel Bryan Brock Lesnar, like having rewatched everything, I think those might be my 3 favorite matches of all time right now.
Pretty excellent.
But yeah, so Roddy Piper. What's
Okay, Roddy Piper.
Do you, let's start with some biographical stuff. He seems
Okay.
to be, I mean, obviously he's Scottish.
He was born in Saskatchewan in Canada. And is apparently related to the Hart family in a way that none of them quite understand.
Bruce claimed that he was their second cousin.
Yeah.
You know, it may be true. It may just be wrestling, but they always acted like they were family. Piper grew up, you know, his dad was a Mountie. He was a very troubled child. He was expelled from school.
His dad was a Mountie.
What?
So he
His dad was a
finally,
Mountie.
so it makes sense, you know, like it was a very
Yeah, he
Freudian
finally got his
thing
match with the Mountie.
when he beat the Mountie for the Intercontinental title. Damn.
Well, he was not particularly fond of his parents. He was expelled from school at 13 for carrying a switchblade, which then he promptly left home, lived in a series of youth hostels, joined the Canadian Army for a year. He had said in several interviews he doesn't know where he picked up the bagpipes, but at some point he started playing the bagpipes.
Just that Scottish gene.
yeah.
Just it's going to
Right.
realize itself one way or another.
And he got into wrestling through the regular carny ways that was in the late 60s.
And he was a Golden Gloves
is when he
boxer.
started. He was a Golden Gloves boxer too. Yes, he was a trained boxer. He trained boxing more than he trained wrestling.
Well, I was gonna say, and I think we've talked about this before when Piper comes up.
Yeah.
Piper does not look like he is a trained wrestler in any way, shape, or form. He like looks like he moves wrong.
Yeah.
He like
Yeah.
everything he does, especially like I'm watching him. Just watching Piper makes my knees hurt. Because he's constantly landing at these like angles where the way that and it's like something that you would never notice except for the fact that you realize that he's not doing it and like every other wrestler is doing it, because a basic part of this training seems to be
Right.
to learn how to like not hurt yourself and land right, so you're not like fucking rolling the dice on your knees every time you drop to the ground. And it's like but it also lends to the fact that he seems dangerous. On a recent episode, we talked about the time that we were in Philly and there was a guy outside who was going around tapping people on the balls, like clearly trying to like get them to fight him, sort of, and just being invasive.
Yeah.
And Piper is really that. There is
Piper is that guy.
Totally.
there is an older generation of dudes, and there's probably dudes our age who are like this too, but there just aren't as many of them. It feels like there used to just be millions of these guys who just like so like aggressively like in your space, like they're sort of like bullying you, but they're also like trying to get you to fight them, and it's sort of like a constant test of your manhood. And it's just this like aggressive, violent, off-kilter masculinity that's very
Evan,
scary.
Remember when we were playing in Murfreesboro, North Carolina, and that guy tried to pay or offered to pay Gabe $100 in order to fight him?
Oh yes, I do remember that. Yeah, and then his friend had to be like, no, these guys aren't like that.
Yeah, that's that kind of energy. That was wow. That was the most backwoods place I've ever been in my life by far.
Yeah, that was some shit. That was fun. It was a fun show though.
Piper was definitely very familiar through his childhood and teenage years, and up until joining the Canadian Army. Very familiar with fighting people physically. He did not I mean, I know I just kind of glossed over it, but think about that for a second. He spent his entire teenage year living in youth hostels in in Canada, where he was constantly fighting for any property that he owned. He was constantly fighting the various other cliques that you meet in places like youth hostels, where not being in school, he had it really rough. And if you study his life afterwards, he was always very paranoid and just very careful about himself and his money and his career and his family, and it did very well by him over the course of his life. He became a movie star and a millionaire, and he married his wife, Kitty, and was it Kitty? Kitty was somebody's wife. I think it was Kitty. He married his wife, Kitty, in, I believe, 1985, and they stayed married until the day he died. He had 4 children with her, or she had 4 children with him. And, he was very, as soon as he had something resembling a normal life, he did whatever he could to keep it, because he didn't know that when he was a kid. As a result of that, he was very poorly educated. He claims to have never read an entire book, and it's not in a way that some people are proud of that. He's he thought he was very dyslexic. He could read, pamphlets and he could read, but he was functionally illiterate otherwise, and he knows, because he was a smart guy, that held him back. So he was a victim of he was a victim of society, if you want to go right to the punk rock version of it.
I mean, no, that's true. That
against
that kind
all
of
odds,
fucking
he made
shit.
it. And he was an undersized guy for a wrestler, too, when he started his wrestling career. He was 150 pounds. He says his first match was against Larry the Axe Hennig, who just told him, well, meet me in the ring. And it lasted 30 seconds, and Larry broke his nose and told him later that was fine. And he just kept going after that.
His body type does also seem to be indicative of the, sometimes watching wrestling, it feels like nobody did squats until 1993, because they're just and he has because that's the thing, because he's got he's got he's got a boxer's upper body, he's got a pretty strong upper body, and his legs are just kind of normal dude legs that also kind of stick out at just enough of an angle to fucking destroy his knees constantly. I'm going to keep coming back to this because it bothers me every time. My knees also suck, so that's why it pains me so much to see it.
Yeah, I think he definitely had a couple of, at least one hip replacement before.
Yeah, by the time he was 40. Yeah. He had admitted openly later on that he did a lot of various drugs in the WWF run, not the kind of drugs that the rock stars do. He said, well, I mean, the way the schedule went for his undersized frame, he'd take steroids and then he'd go work out heavy because he needed to bulk up, because it was a big man's territory and he was going to be facing Hogan, who was so much bigger than him. And then he needed, you go to the arena and wrestle, go to the hotel room, you got 5 hours to sleep, you need to get some sleep. Because that's when the workout takes effect. So you take downers to go to sleep, and then you wake up, and then you take cocaine to wake up, and then you immediately go to the next town and get to the gym again, and it's an endless cycle, because you'd be wrestling 7 days a week at the time. You'd get when you were really on top, you'd get 2 days a month off, and that would be it. And you'd spend that time doing your laundry. Maybe you'd see your family.
He looks especially ripped in the Adonis match, I think.
Yeah. Well, he had stopped wrestling that schedule at that point. They had billed it as his retirement match, which was laughable,
we'll get to that,
of course.
Yeah.
We'll get to that, yeah.
All right, so let's start talking about the specific content for this episode.
Right.
The first thing I sent you guys was December 28th, 1984. This is one of the most important events in the development of the rock and wrestling connection, which culminated at the first WrestleMania, which Roddy Piper was in the main event of, teaming with Paul Orndorff against Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. And so really, this is one of the main catalysts for that match. Dick Clark is giving Cyndi Lauper this award for her contributions to women's wrestling, because she had been managing Wendy Richter at the time.
So let me insert something right here. Think about that for a second, the level of celebrity that we're talking about here. That would be like if on Monday Night Raw, Ryan Seacrest was presenting Lady Gaga with an award for her contributions to wrestling. That's the level of celebrity we were talking about at the time. Cyndi Lauper was the hottest act that wasn't named Michael Jackson in the country, and Dick Clark was Dick Clark. He had been the host of America for 30 years at that point.
Yeah, and so Lauper's manager, David Wolf, is there. Captain Lou Albano, who had been a heel manager for years, comes out, and he was in the Girls Just Want to Have Fun video. So he's now aligned with Lauper. They make a big deal about the fact that he's, helping raise money for multiple sclerosis, so he's not a heel anymore. Evan, you'll probably remember him from one other thing in the 80s.
I of course remember him as eventually becoming not just not a heel, but the ultimate hero, Mario.
Yes. The Super Mario Brothers cartoon show, he would do the live action hosting, basically, of it.
Easily the second greatest actor ever to take on the role.
Yes.
It is. It's Bob Hoskins. I mean, come on.
Bob Hoskins, right.
That movie might suck and not be, have anything to do with the game, but Bob Hoskins, he does.
Everyone in that movie deserved better. Bob Hoskins is great. John Leguizamo always deserved better, just in his career in general.
Dude, John Leguizamo is in. I've mentioned this movie on this podcast before, but yeah, John Leguizamo is in my all-time favorite bad movie, The Happening, and delivers a great performance given what he has to work with in that film.
We have this whole setup, Lauper's getting the award, Albano's talking, whatever. Piper comes out, and this is in Madison Square Garden. Piper comes out and just creates utter bedlam within seconds. He smashes the gold record over Albano's head. He kicks Cyndi Lauper across the ring. He body slams David Wolf. And it's awesome. Everyone hates it. Everyone wants to kill him.
Dick Clark goes running.
Dick Clark goes running. Finally, Hogan comes out and chases Piper off. But man, what a bastard.
Right, and that was what made Piper so compelling, is that where he went, chaos followed.
And I didn't want to make Evan watch too much, but if you go online and you look up just some of the promos he cut on Cyndi Lauper after that, it's incredible stuff. Just so mean-spirited, and he's very anti-rock and roll. I don't know.
Right, he's very anti-rock and roll.
As this
you could still get away with being...
Form, yeah.
You could still get away with being the heel that didn't like that rock music in 1985, believe it or not. It's because it was still so big,
Right, and I guess it was just it was becoming mainstream in a way. It was ceasing to be counterculture and just becoming culture at that point.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget in the 80s the unbelievable wave of 50s nostalgia that was happening at the time. And this was also the era of Footloose and shit like that. So the authority figures coming in and being like, I don't like these things that are cool that our society embraced 30 years ago. But they're just like, it's right. I don't know. It's sort of a throwbacky kind of thing, maybe.
Sure. So, and I think also it made a lot more sense in the context of wrestling, because wrestling was so steeped in the past up until now. Vince McMahon is rebelling against the rest of the wrestling promoters who want to keep wrestling the same that it's been since the 50s, by bringing in these rock and roll personalities. That was exactly the attitude that the old school promoters had.
So it's kind of by having Piper be that, it's kind of Vince sort of creating his a character out of his enemies and then smashing that character over the head with a chair.
Yeah. It's something he loved doing and did many times after this.
Absolutely. So speaking of smashing people over the head with things.
For the record, people who know Vince say that he's a huge fan of AC/DC and his tastes have not evolved in the last 30 years. So you can, I'm sure that's not a surprise. You're driving with him and he'll turn on Back in Black and start singing along with it. Then he'll roll up all the windows and fart and laugh at you while declaring all he eats is protein. That's what Jim Ross said in his book. So it's a great book.
So yeah, we watched this Piper's Pit segment from March 28th, 1984. This is earlier than the Cyndi Lauper stuff. This is really what got Piper over as a heel to begin with in the WWF. He had just come up from the NWA in early '84. So he's got Superfly Jimmy Snuka, the Fijian superstar, on his interview show, The Piper's Pit. And he proceeds to mock him with a number of fruits, with a pineapple and a banana. He calls him a monkey. He gives him the pineapple and bananas to make him feel at home. And then he's like, oh, and Snuka at some point is like, are you making fun of me? And
Yeah. Snuka was super charismatic, but he was not very good with words.
no. And eventually Piper smashes the fucking coconut over Snuka's head. And this is not some fringe thing that has been buried under the rug or whatever. This is one of the most memorable moments of Piper's career that they replay over and over again. They don't show the part where he's whipping Snuka, telling him to get up, boy. But they do show the part where he smashes him with the coconut.
By now, it's like the 1 second clip of the coconut.
And I'm guessing that is not a doctored coconut. I'm guessing that
No. I've seen many interviews with Piper. He was, after his career, was rather loose-lipped about as much that was going on, unlike some of his compatriots. And he always had to breathe a second, like, we're gonna break kayfabe. It's okay. It's okay. And his story of this night was they were still doing heels and faces in different locker rooms. So they told him, all right, this is your interview show. You do the thing with the fruits, say what you're going to say, and then you smash him with the coconut. Okay. And so he smashes Snuka with the coconut. And the thing is, coconuts, those things you need a drill to get through.
Well, yeah, I couldn't believe that Snuka
Yeah.
was fucking conscious after that.
He said that afterwards, he saw Snuka. He found Snuka, and Snuka was sitting there staring into the space. He's like, "Are you okay? How did you take the coconut?" And Snuka said, "Brother, they didn't tell me about any coconut, man." And they told Piper, "You smashed the coconut over his head." And Piper, it was part of a longer piece where he talks about how much they constantly, on a corporate level, would mess with Snuka out of mostly racism. Now, I don't want to paint Snuka in a sympathetic light. Snuka totally killed that girl. So I don't want to be oh, poor Snuka. But Snuka was they messed with him pretty badly. He was so popular and the people loved him so much. And they knew it. And they knew that they had him because he was also illiterate. And he also had his own share of mental problems.
Horrible things can happen to horrible people too.
Agreed.
That
Yes.
and we should be able to condemn those bad things happening to those people, irrespective of...
I imagine getting smashed over the head with the coconut did not help those mental problems at all.
No. When Snuka died, he was almost completely unaware of his surroundings due to his concussion issues, post-concussion syndrome. If you'll remember, they were finally about to put him on trial for the murder he had committed 30 years previous, and the judge threw it out and said, "We're not really even putting a person on trial here. Look at this guy." And he promptly died. And it's true. Justice
in
was
the courtroom.
Not in the courtroom, but within a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
he was dead. Justice was thrown out when they didn't try him in the 80s. I don't think Justice would have been trying this guy who didn't know where he was 30 years after the fact, But that's a sad story of Jimmy Snuka and the crimes of Jimmy Snuka.
That was Nancy Argentino. Was the
Nancy
victim.
Argentino. Say her name.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, did Piper so you said that he had kind of a drug problem. Did he have kind of a drinking problem too?
I don't think he had
At
a
all?
problem. I think he just drank as much as everybody else did.
Okay.
Were
Because
there men before 2000 that didn't have drinking problems?
That's true.
Right.
That was just called and for all of the stereotypes that are out there, I mean the level of acceptable drinking in Scottish culture is something that we would describe as a problem in a lot of other parts of the world.
On Legends House, which was the last big WWE project he was really a part of, he addresses in the first episode, some of the guys are all around drinking, and I quit drinking years ago and doing any of that, and I really shouldn't be around these guys if this is what they're going to do all night. And it was old guys sitting around drinking. It's not like they were partying hard or anything, but he was sober. He was a sober family man in his late 50s. He didn't want to start trying to top it with the guys.
I bring it up because he has a vocal cadence that reminds me of a lot of drunken frat guys who make this kind of like these sustained like honky mid-rangey kind of sounds while they're mocking, which is partially because it's mocking and partially because if you're inebriated it like sort of feels good in your skull to like be loud and annoying like and all this. And I'm sure it's part of his character of being an amazing heel, but there was part of me that was just like, oh, is he just like this? I don't know.
I watched some pieces of a shoot interview from like 10 years ago. It is really hard to follow what he's saying by that point. And I don't know if that's more concussions or drugs or whatever, but he became increasingly incoherent over the course of his life.
The first time I ever really saw him, because I tragically have not seen the classic film They Live that many people have told me I would love. We'll watch it for the premium episodes. My first experience of him was when he was on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And his appearance in that, which is great, but like I was like, who is this fucking guy they got? Like, who is this man they found on the street to just come in and be on the show?
Well, he was very well known, and he could do that part well, you know. I mean, he acted in a lot of stuff, you know. He would play down how rich he became because I think he was afraid people would like try and take it from him. Because once again, you know, when you grow up that level of like poor and scared for like your life, you know, you tend to hoard. And that was just that. He lived mostly. Where did he end up living? The Pacific Northwest somewhere.
Yeah, Portland.
Portland, right? Portland. He was so loyal to the wrestling promoter in Portland, he told Vince McMahon when he came on to the WWF, I won't do any of your shows if you go to Portland. Oh, wow. I refuse to compete against Don Owens, who was so good to me in my younger days. And Vince accepted that. You know, they would tour the country, and Piper would not compete against Don Owens.
I think they eventually absorbed that territory, right?
Well, yeah, eventually they all went out of business, but that's another story entirely.
Okay, getting to the matches. First, WrestleMania 2. We're finally hitting WrestleMania 2 here with the boxing match between Roddy Piper and Mr. T. Evan, I think this is your first worked pro wrestling boxing match that you've seen, right?
Were there many?
There have been a few notable ones.
There have been a few.
Because my interpretation was that this was just like WrestleMania didn't quite have the self-confidence to have all wrestling. And then so they were like, we got to throw some boxing in there because boxing was a much bigger deal back then.
I think it's more like they didn't have the confidence in Mr. T to do a one-on-one match wrestling, but it would be easier for him to do it boxing.
Well, also keep in mind that Mr. T was very famous for playing Clubber Lang in Rocky III. So people were used to seeing him boxing. And Piper was a Golden Gloves boxer, so he knew what he was doing.
Mr. T was initially a bodybuilder, right? And then sort of just became known as a personality and then was in the A-Team.
I don't know if he was ever a bodybuilder. He did become very famous as on the A-Team and in the movies and so on. I have read up on the history of Mr. T, but I'm not quite sure if he ever did any bodybuilding.
Yeah, I'm trying. I couldn't remember what his origins were.
He's certainly
like
in
what
shape.
World he came from.
Yeah, he says he wanted to be called Mr. T because nobody ever called his father Mister, and he wanted to make sure everybody who talked to him had to call him Mister. And I can dig it.
He is the ultimate positive role model in the 80s, you know.
So that being said, the people who in wrestling who worked with him said he was a gigantic prima donna pain in the ass to work with. Who really thought he was doing them a favor too much. Other than Hulk Hogan, who loved him.
They put him in the Hall of Fame a few years back, and his Hall of Fame speech is the longest, most rambly, and it's so bad. It's really comically bad.
He said he thought they said just take as long as you're going to take, but at like the 20-minute mark of him saying nothing, they did the equivalent of getting the hook. They played Kane's music, and Kane came out from backstage and was like, hey man, it's time to go. And he apologized. Look, I'm a fan of Mr. T. People at the time in wrestling said he was a prima donna and hard to work with. And the truth is, by the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, his star started to wane as he did become too full of himself. But in general, Mr. T is a very positive force, especially these days. All he wants is that everybody to be cool. And I can dig that. And he's cool.
Yeah, I just looked up some of Mr. T's past. He first came to notoriety doing tough man competitions. specifically a show called America's Toughest Bouncer, which I now must see.
Yes.
Wow. I mean, that's quite a competition, man. There are some tough bouncers out there.
Yep.
Yeah.
He looks like America's toughest bouncer.
Hell yeah. So, okay, there's a bunch of notable celebrities involved in this match, including guest ring announcer Joan fucking Rivers.
Fucking Rivers, yeah.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Joan Rivers.
Who is Herb?
man.
I have
Who
no
is
idea.
Herb
I have
the
no idea.
time-
Okay,
Timekeeper?
Herb was a he was a character in a commercial for some fast food. I can't remember if it's Burger King or I think it might have been Burger King, but I'm not sure. He was a minor celeb. He was no Joan Rivers, that's for sure. But the gimmick for WrestleMania for years is that they'd invite the stars, and the stars would show up like, this is fun, WrestleMania, right?
A note on this WrestleMania, it was held in 3 different locations. In Uniondale, Long Island at the Nassau Coliseum, in Chicago, and in L.A. And so, like, you'd watch a third of the show live if you were there, and then you'd see the other 2/3 by closed circuit.
They wanted to find a way to sell more tickets. This was before pay-per-view. There would be, like Ben said, closed circuit arenas and theaters would show stuff like that. Something that, like, our generation completely missed that, but that was a thing. If there was a big event, a movie theater would, like, show the big boxing match or something in the 70s on a closed circuit
So
thing.
the best thing is the judges are basketball player Daryl Dawkins, who I was not familiar with, Cab Calloway, and G. Gordon Liddy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
It was-
Well, he was Nixon's. He was in the Nixon administration.
Yeah, he
right?
was a big part of the Watergate scandal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But apparently also had some career as a TV personality after that.
Did he?
Yeah, look up his Wikipedia.
All right.
It's I couldn't.
I'll check it out.
I gave it a very quick glance.
People get reformed in the public eye in the most interesting of ways. Remember that, everybody who thinks they've seen the last of X, Y, or Z person.
it would be really funny if, like, you know, we were watching AEW tomorrow and they were just like, and special guest referee Henry Kissinger.
Right. I'd watch it.
So yeah, and we got Joe Frazier and the Haiti Kid with
Yeah.
Mr. T, and of course Cowboy Bob Orton, and some trainer, I guess a famous boxer named Lou Duva, who's with
Right.
them. So
I like the promo before the match a lot. That's pure Piper. Did you see the promo before the match?
I must have. I watched all of this.
well, you said something about Piper insinuating that Mr. T had painted himself black or something. What was that?
Yes. Yeah. That was the whole I mean, the promo is really good right up until that part at the very end. But he does, like, yeah, Piper does a good job of that, like, stream of consciousness, sort of much like a scary drunk man outside of a bar trying to fight you. He says things that don't really make a lot of sense, but you understand that he is threatening you.
Yeah, he was a rambling drunk man. That's kind of what he had been going for the whole time. I didn't quite get that he insinuated that Mr. T painted himself black, like you said. I thought he insinuated, maybe the next time he'd paint himself black to imitate Mr. T or something, which is also unacceptable.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I got.
I got that he was saying I would never. He was like, I would never shave my hair in like an Indian and paint myself black.
I remember what it is now. There was a promo when Piper was referencing this where T was like wore a kilt and was making fun of Roddy Piper with like Piper's like costume on. And Piper was saying, "Well, I wouldn't shave my head because he had the mohawk.
That's
I wouldn't
good.
shave
All right.
my head like that and paint myself black."
Well, that's good. That's good. That is because
Well,
okay. Without that
I
context,
think that downgrades it from being super offensive just to being pretty inappropriate.
offensive. Yeah.
They also-
definitely.
I don't know. I'm not the expert on this.
Mr. T references in his promo that they like beat down the Haiti Kid and shaved his head into a mohawk.
the Haiti Kid was on an episode of Piper's Pit. Piper's Pit made fun of him for being a little guy. And then, shaved his head a bunch. And then Haiti Kid shaved the rest of his head. And it was a way to get Haiti Kid onto WrestleMania, too, because they liked him. They wanted to give him a spot. And they put him with Mr. T's entourage, There you go.
So the match is set for 10 rounds of boxing. They get up to round 4. And I thought they did a pretty good job making a dramatic fake boxing match here.
I've seen worse worked boxing. The first round was pretty even. T maybe got a little bit of an edge, and then Piper clearly won round 2, and T clearly won round 3. They each got a knockdown.
I love I think it was the beginning of round 3. Piper comes out with a ton of grease on his head.
Yeah.
And they have to stop it for a minute and take it off of him. Just that
Do you know what that's about, Evan?
I do not. Also,
So,
just to clarify,
the
there's a
second
point
round.
system. There's a point system in boxing, right?
Yes. And it's not just 1 to 10. It's there's kind of a baseline of 10, and then you take points away for mistakes or not doing so well, and then it's overly complicated is boxing's point system. But it's cheating in boxing to wear too much lubricant on your face. Now, putting a little bit of Vaseline or something on your face can help if there's any cuts or swelling. It can help soothe a little bit. It can help with sweat. But if you put a giant gob of Vaseline on your face, if somebody punches you in that gob, their fist just in the glove especially just slides right off your face.
Ah.
And that's
smart.
illegal.
I should start smearing Vaseline all over my face and then getting into fights with people. I'll be basically invincible.
Well, it's
Never
it's
thought
a
of
thing.
that. I could use that to fight crime.
That goes
People in MMA will Vaseline up their bodies so that it's harder for their opponents to grab onto them. And it's a serious infraction of the rules if you're caught.
and that was one of the charges raised against Frank Gotch in the Gotch Hackenschmidt
Right.
Classic, was that he was too oiled up. Okay, so I mean, the match, it's a boxing match, and then in the
Yeah, it was
end,
fine.
of course, Piper the wrestler throws a stool at Mr. T and then body slams him to become disqualified.
Yeah.
And it was just a matter of time before Piper did that, I figure.
Piper was kind of the king of the DQs, when he came in to face Hogan, and he was the hottest heel anybody had ever seen, and they built the national WWF on the back of Hogan. Piper was always like, hey, they built it off of Hogan facing Piper. If you didn't have a heel like me that was willing to be as hated as I was hated, the babyface wouldn't have worked so well. And he always refused to lose clean to Hogan. There is no WWF match in the mid-'80s where Hogan big boot leg drop pins Roddy Piper. And he said because he know how that went. He knows he thought it was the same way it went with Bruno Sammartino in the 70s. The heel would come in, they'd have 6 months, Bruno would beat the heel, and then the heel would start losing to everybody and eventually leave. Piper's like, no, I'm not shuffling off. And this was back when if you were hot enough, you could just do that and say to the promoter, I'm not losing to your champion. We're over here. So they started having him lose most of his matches by DQ or countout. And he said, I never had a problem doing the job. I didn't want to be completely put under the champion like that.
Which is why it's so notable and remarkable and meaningful that he loses to Brett in the third match.
That's the first time he gets pinned in the WWF, I think.
Yeah, ever.
Maybe the second.
In almost a decade of being there.
Now, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here.
All right. Moving on to a year later, WrestleMania 3. Piper decides he's going to retire so he can go do movies exclusively. And they set up this match with Adrian Adonis. Now, before the match, so Piper had been gone for about 5 months. And in that time, they replaced the Piper's Pit interview segment with the Flower Shop. Now, before that, they did that. Adrian Adonis was doing this kind of Bowery thug gimmick. And he actually, he was teaming with Dick Murdoch, and they were this weird odd couple, and he'd bring Dick Murdoch down to the Bowery to see, how he lives. And at some point, he gives his leather jacket to Piper on Piper's Pit so that he can go off and become this more flamboyant version of the adorable Adrian Adonis character. And he does that, and he creates the Flower Shop, which is his interview segment. And Cowboy Bob Orton joins him, starts wearing a pink hat. Eventually, Piper returns, and he wants his interview segment back, and Adonis is not happy to give it to him. And so there's a few interactions between them. One of them is this segment on the Flower Shop, September 6, 1986, where Piper comes and confronts Adonis. So, Evan, what did you think of this segment here?
Enjoyed it way more than I thought I was going to. Kind of went into this thinking like, all right, like this will be like other wrestling I have seen from this time. Adrian Adonis is fucking awesome.
Well, yeah, just talking about the segment
yeah.
first.
Who is this guy?
The Flower Shop.
The Flower Shop.
Piper being like not exactly low key homophobic and all that.
This whole premise is also very clearly like a kind of a gay panic homophobic thing. It's just like, like they're running a flower shop. We all know what that means.
I mean, if he wasn't a heel,
if
he wasn't a heel, Adonis would be this incredible drag character. But given the sentiments at the time, he had to be a heel.
Yeah. Oh, and this was, I mean, like, you know, sometimes you see things and you're like, it used to be easier to be funny. You know, where like you could just kind of like we had decades where there were a lot of guys who were considered hilarious, who were kind of just making loud sounds, kind of just making loud funny sounds with their face. And but also not to say that there's no showmanship here or anything, but I was just like watching this and I was like, this was this was something that was very funny at the time, and in retrospect is sucks and is based in
a lot of
homophobia.
A lot of Piper's jokes, if you listen to them really closely, make no sense whatsoever.
No, none. I wrote down.
Yeah.
Hold on. Okay, no. In the next match, I wrote down some shit that he says to Brett that was like nonsense. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
we'll definitely.
So now
get to
the
that.
match at WrestleMania 3 between Adonis and Piper. Evan.
Yeah, Adonis was great. What do you think?
Adonis is bumping is crazy.
Yeah. See. So yeah. I mean, man, talk about. I always say I love seeing a graceful fat guy. And he's like they started off, and I was just like, what is this guy's deal? He's got mauve granny panties. He's got hair that looks like a wig, but it's
not.
Like, and it's like a bright straw yellow curly mullet. And he is shaped like Dr. Robotnik, and he flies through the air with grace and skill,
like fucking Shawn Michaels.
It was incredible. Like I would love to do an episode on this guy because he seems remarkable. What was his deal?
Well, I mean, he started in the early 70s. He was not always adorable Adrian Adonis. He was Adrian Adonis. He was like a leather jacket biker guy, more like that. He was still kind of shaped like that, except he was in a lot better shape, if that makes sense.
I think
he was a tough guy.
I
think
it was always kind of implied that he was gay, like
maybe
even as the biker, you know. Like maybe
it's entirely possible,
but you never know. Like people didn't know that fucking Halford was gay, right?
Right. Well, he eventually, in the late 70s, started teaming with Jesse Ventura, and him and Jesse Ventura were a tag team for several years. They came to the WWF together in the early 80s before Ventura stopped wrestling. And, he was a top heel, like in the latter days of the Backlund era. You could see matches like from then. And then, he came up. He started doing this wacky gimmick because in the WWF, it was more starting to be wacky gimmicks. And he left shortly after this match, and he died in a car accident in a couple of years after this. So what could have been a great late career was certainly cut short. He died in one of the most Canadian ways possible in Newfoundland. Him and a van full of wrestlers swerved to miss a moose, and it crashed.
And into a giant vat of maple syrup.
Yeah, and it caught fire, and it was very impolite. But seriously, though, most of the wrestlers in that van died. It was terrible. But that's his career. If you want to see more of his stuff, I don't know how much you'd probably be impressed by him, but it's going to be some old-fashioned stuff because this is the tail end of what he was doing. But I'd be willing to look it up. I'm sure I'd enjoy it because he was very good.
I was shocked at just how well, not just how well he moved, but how this match between the two of them did not have a lot of the same sort of, I don't know, like boring repetitiveness that I kind of associate with this era.
Or wrestling moves, though. Like, this has about as many
true.
moves as the boxing match did.
It looks like a fight between these two guys who wanted to fight.
And sometimes
Jimmy
Jimmy Hart,
Hart's all there. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
The main move that's at the center of the match is the sleeper hold, or Good Night Irene, as Adonis puts it, as Adonis calls it. A weird kind of finish where Adonis puts him in the sleeper. He puts him to sleep, it looks like, but releases the hold before his arm comes down the third time, thinking that he's won, but he didn't win. Meanwhile, Brutus Beefcake, who earlier in the night had begun his face turn by actually being abandoned by his partners in the Dream Team, as they were called, comes and revives Piper, allowing Piper to recover, put Adonis in the sleeper hold, and beat him. And then, per the rules of the match, because it was a haircut match, they then shave Adonis's head, giving Beefcake a new profession that would bring him to greater heights than he had ever been before for the next several years, as he became Brutus the Barber Beefcake.
Yeah, this was the genesis of that. I do enjoy Gorilla Monsoon saying with confidence, this is the last time we'll ever see Roddy Piper wrestle.
Yeah.
It was not. The story behind that, by the way, is that like he had started to get like shuffled down the card a little bit, and Piper there was no contract there. This was before people had like exclusive contracts. I mean, a few people did, but Piper didn't. And he talked to Vince, and he's like, "Look, what's happening now?" And Vince said, "Look, I don't think we're gonna use. We don't have a spot on top for you now." And Piper's like, "Well, I've been starting to make movies. I'm just gonna leave." Well, and Vince is like, "Fine, we can redo this match at WrestleMania?" And he's like, "Yeah, we can do this match at WrestleMania." And Piper said all he needed to make sure of, he's like, "My name is Roddy Piper, and it's my name. You don't own that." And they did not contest that. And he was like, "Great." And he left on good terms. And he came back sporadically whenever they wanted to do business. And that was that, He never wrestled that full-time schedule again. But his body was still like deteriorated heavily over the years. Well, also making action movies is kind of hard on your body too.
But I'm sure that a lot of the damage had been done by the time he left.
Last two things I love about this match are, one, them showing Adonis the mirror after shaving his head and him flipping out and punching it.
Immediately.
That was some great.
He doesn't do the
acting.
long comical look, wide eyes. He sees it. He knows what's going on. He just starts swinging.
And then the kid jumping in the ring at the end, and Piper just like, hey, it's his retirement match. He humors the kid for a second before you see him being dragged off by security.
Well, Piper knew how to react.
Okay.
That's an important skill.
Now, perhaps one of my favorite matches ever at WrestleMania 8, Roddy Piper defending the Intercontinental title against Bret Hart. This is the only title that Piper ever held in the WWF, was the Intercontinental Championship this run. And this was really his retirement match, actually. He was going at, not only was he not going to work a full schedule after this, but his appearances were extremely sporadic after this. And he didn't show up again for at least 2 years. So
yeah, he was but a special attraction from here on out.
So he thought of this as him passing the torch, because he still thought of himself as the top star in the company, I guess. And he passed the torch to Bret Hart by actually losing to him clean. But before we get to that, the promo between the two of them is one of my favorite things ever. As a little kid, I had this whole thing memorized.
Yeah. So what did you think of the promo, Evan?
So I wrote down, he says some things to Bret. He claims to have known Bret since he was very young.
Which is almost true. Apparently, he really met Bret when Bret started wrestling and was getting ribbed a lot by the older guys, or like getting treated kind of badly in the ring by the older guys. And Piper kind of took him under his wing and helped him out at that point. But he did know his dad,
Oh, they all know Stu.
But
He he implies so he makes fun of Brett for a few things. Now the first thing, he says that he was potty trained late.
Yes.
Like says potty trained, which that's a thing that I guess is insulting. That makes
You weren't
sense.
potty trained until you were 7, but
But then he said, "Oh, and then something about like his shoes were always tied together."
Yeah, like Brett would always tie his shoes together when they were kids. Isn't that funny?
What?
because
What does that?
he's dumb and he couldn't keep track of like which laces he was tying, so he tied them
He's
together.
he's just trying to bait Brett.
Was this a commonly accepted metaphor for stupidity at the time? Was tying your shoes together a thing that when Roddy Piper said it, he was expecting other people to be like, "Ah, yes, somebody tying their shoes together." The
I don't
sign
know.
of being a dumbass that we
I
all
think-
know.
It's supposed to be a mistake that a small child makes.
Okay.
I don't know.
Because he's talking about when they're little kids, which they didn't really know each other when they were little kids. But he's trying to say, like, because that is a mistake a small child just learning how to tie their shoes might make.
And here's Piper trying to make light of Brett, and Brett is not having it.
No.
Yeah,
No.
Brett does not crack.
Well, and then he says that when his mom would make him bologna sandwiches, she would just put on one piece of bologna, which feels like he's making fun of him for being poor, but he's a heart with there, so I'm gonna guess they're not poor. Like,
I think he was just trying to insult his mom. He's trying to get a rise out of Brett. He's trying to get Brett to fight him so Piper can have an excuse to get angry. Because here's the thing about this. They're both baby faces at this point. But Piper is clearly the more established guy and so famous for being the antagonist that he's trying to antagonize Brett into
Turning
give me
heel.
a reason.
Yeah.
Pick up the gun, pick up the gun.
And that's what's so amazing about this match is that dynamic, where you have Brett playing possum a lot, which would be a heel thing, except you know what Piper's capable of. And Brett knows what Piper's capable of. So you forgive Brett for using somewhat underhanded tactics because you know that he's just preemptively doing it because that's what Piper's going to do. And Piper does a little bit of it later on. He actually there's actually a callback to the shoes tied thing. He tells Brett that his shoes are untied, and when Brett
Which
looks
they
down,
were.
he sucker punches him. Yeah.
And that's the thing. That would have been dumb if later you didn't see that one of Brett's boots was actually untied. And that sucker punch was great. That's, you see the guys punching and punching. He's like, no, down there, boof. And Brett went right down and started bleeding out the face.
Chekhov's shoelaces.
Yeah, right. Chekhov. That's a really cool
Yeah.
thing because we've talked about before how you got blood on this show, and so did Flair in the Macho Man match, but Flair got fined for it and Brett didn't because they did it ingeniously. Brett, I figured it out, I think. Brett Blades, they both flop out of the ring together. And I think Brett bladed then and just kept his face away from the camera until the spot where Piper sucker punches him. And then you see the blood. But you wouldn't
and
have
you see
thought.
the blood starting to drip.
Yeah. And then they do the bulldog spot later. And that's where you really see the blood a lot. And then you're thinking, oh, maybe he bladed between the sucker punch and the bulldog. But no, he couldn't have done that. There wasn't a moment for that. And
There was blood on the mat under his face after the sucker punch.
Yeah. But they hid the blading. They embedded it in a place in the match where you wouldn't look for it. Even looking back, which was cool. Now, the really notable thing about this match is the finish. So Piper, he goes for the ring bell, and he acts like he's going to hit Brett with the bell, and then he has second thoughts, and he decides he doesn't want to do that and throws it out.
Now, that was so brilliant how he did it, because he holds the bell up, and there's the fans at first are like, oh yeah, hit him, because, they're bloodthirsty animals, and that's what wrestling fans do. And he wanted them to boo that so he could reconsider. So instead of thinking, oh no, this isn't working and panicking, he puts it down, he waits a little, he looks around, he raises it again, he starts doubting in his face, and then the crowd starts thinking, we don't. And as Brett as smart as he was, gets kind of up to his knees, looking kind of pathetic, like, don't hit me in the face with the bell. And by the third time Piper raised the bell, the crowd was with him and they started booing him. And then Piper started reacting to everyone booing him, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do it this time. I know maybe I shouldn't. And then eventually, and Bobby Heenan, by the way, is losing his mind on commentary. Yeah. Like, he is screaming at Piper to hit him with the bell.
Is he the one who says, there's a point where they're looking at each other at the beginning, and he says, two ugly people looking at each other. That's fun.
The commentary in this match is some of my favorite between those.
Heenan has amazing lines.
Yeah.
When Heenan's like, when I was champion, and Gorilla's like, what were you champion of? And Heenan's like, the neighborhood. and Heenan calls Bret out for playing possum. He's like, he's gold bricking. And Gorilla's like, no, he'd never do that. And then it turns out that Heenan was right.
Piper just hurls himself at everything. Yeah. It is like he hurls himself at his opponents. He hurls himself at taking bumps. He hurls himself at talking. He hurls himself at standing.
Yes, just completely.
Yes, yeah. He takes a big swing with everything.
I thought this was a good match, I have to say. Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
The finish.
I thought it was, yeah.
The finish, you saw something similar in the Steve Austin match in Survivor Series 96. But this was the first time Bret did it, where he's in the sleeper hold, he kicks his feet off of the top turnbuckle, flipping backward and pinning Piper. And I think that's my favorite wrestling finish ever.
Yeah.
It's so ingenious.
It's fantastic.
It was pretty fantastic, I have to say. I was like you said, I was surprised at how into this I was.
So, well, tell me, what is it about Bret in this match that made you start to kind of get it?
I just like the way that he was chaining all of the stuff together, just the rise and fall of the match, and like the doing the holds and stuff. It is quite technically impressive.
The way he holds on to Piper's wrist at the beginning of the match for that arm wringer. Like, Piper's doing everything he can to get out of that hold. And Bret just, stubbornly holds on to it until Piper just finally flops on the mat and he can put him in a hammerlock. I dug that.
All right. Yeah. Do we have any final thoughts?
Roddy Piper is certainly a complex figure. He was one of the most popular characters in the 80s and into the 90s, although a lot of his work in the 90s was just god-awful. That's what happens, sometimes. We're gonna watch some of his movies and some more of his like classic matches instead of we're at least gonna watch one from before the WWF on the premium, and that's gonna be cool.
Yeah, there's gonna be a premium episode where we watch more matches, and then at least a premium episode where we watch Hell Comes to Frogtown. A film I know a little bit about but have never seen before and have been told is one of the most audaciously terrible things ever made, and so I'm looking forward to that. And then we'll also watch They Live, and I will finally have seen this classic movie.
I just want to reiterate one really cool thing about Piper and these matches is that he is the proof that wrestling is not about moves. And that you can have an incredibly engaging wrestling match doing very few moves. And the opposite is not the case. I think you can't have a great wrestling match that's just a bunch of moves strung together. That's not what the art of pro wrestling is about.
The song isn't just the notes, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel like he was a I'm trying to. He really embodied a level of like
the Wesley Willis of pro wrestling.
Maybe I wouldn't go that far.
He embodied a level of unpredictability, of danger and unpredictability that is hard to fake. And like even in a wrestler, which just clearly was a big part of who he is.
Going back to that whole sack tap thing. Like, you believe he's the kind of guy who would just fearlessly go into a bar, make fun of everybody, and then deal with and would be happy with the consequences of that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like
He wants somebody to start with him so he has an excuse to start with them. That was the thing with the Brett promo. Finally, Brett does really start with him and rears back for a punch, and Piper pulls out his fist covered in a leather belt.
Yeah.
Like, nope. I got you. I got under your skin. I got you. I'll see you in the ring. You'll already be angry. Didn't work out.
No.
This has been Contesting Wrestling. Thank you so much for listening. You should hit us up on Twitter at ContestingW. Let us know if there's anything we missed, anything you think we should cover, anything you think the guys should show me to help me expand my understanding of wrestling. If you like what we do and you want to hear more, we have weekly bonus episodes on Patreon. We normally charge $5 a month for it, but in the show notes, if you look down to the show notes on your podcast app, you'll see links to some organizations that you should be donating your time and money to that are, either bail organizations or groups that have a more long-term focus, or groups that are, helping people in immediate need right now, all related to this uprising against police violence and systemic racism. And we don't want you to have to make a choice between giving them money and giving us money. You should be giving them money. So if you make a $5 donation or more and you take a screenshot of the receipt, please send that to us on Twitter, and we will send you a link to the premium episode. Because, and if you want to give us both money, hey, that's great. I'm not going to stop you for sure. But I am usually in a situation where I only have $5 to spend, and so I know what that's like. This has been Contesting Wrestling. Thank you. We love you.